So this is a Boston brace shirt. It's a silver impregnated shirt. I actually like the ones that have sleeves on them. But something like that can work very well. And it's nice because you can trim it, you can pedal the cast very nicely around it. So this is actually my preferred garment on these. Lots of people are doing different things on these. Charlie Johnston, who's a person I always enjoy being around, defined orthopedics is that specialty where you take a perfectly good operation and change it the first time you do it. So he's probably correct. So I always try to add a little bit of some padding. We put it into the belly area here. I carefully transfer the child over, and I'm always the one who is catching the child. We call it the baby toss, and you can do rankings 10, 9, for whatever you have. But I want to make sure that child is secure, that our anesthetist, anesthesiologist is very happy with where things are. And then I usually try to position the head on one of the bars up here, because I want everything to be free. And then I take some cotton wrap, and I'll simply wrap the arms up on this side. Usually they're bent upwards a little bit, and it makes it very easy to support. The legs fit just in some straps very much like these that you have here. And then, this is where there's a lot of variation in the materials that are used, but I take these, we have some linen straps that we use, and I end up feeling the crest, and then I tie a square knot really right over the greater trope. And this gives a really nice line of pull for your pelvic portion of the traction. And then I make a second loop down here. And this provides a really nice method of being able to get the traction here. In terms of how much traction to apply, some people have been doing some force measurements. I don't really know. My goal with the traction has never been to correct the curve by doing the traction. It's been really to narrow the body enough that we can actually get really good molds on the cast. And so it's not so much based upon how much traction you're actually using. When you think about when you apply traction, the child's a spring. And so if you apply it, you know, if you put a whole lot of traction on and you put on a cast, what are you going to have to do when that spring comes off? They're going to start settling way back down in there. That's also a problem, by the way, when you're doing really severe curves, because you're trying to correct a lot and then the child gradually starts settling back down into the cast. And you feel like in the larger curves you want to apply more and more traction, but you're going to start seeing their head, and if you're going over the shoulders, the straps are riding up into the ears. And then, so the child again is intubated. There's a bite block in here to make sure that they're not going to pinch. We have someone who is applying the traction down on here. These are pretty cool straps, and I like your table. The Mehta's design on the table is much smaller because most of the kids are much smaller. And I have a little spreader bar that's hooked up on her table to a ratchet, which is up here too. But you could easily do this fixed and pull all your traction from one end. But again, the child's really pretty stable. Once I am sure that the child's stable, and what I do with this bar is I feel the child's coccyx. So this is up on the child's head. This I put right up underneath the child's coccyx. And once we get our traction and everything applied, I take out this middle strap. I know some people are doing it with the middle strap in, but I think that you get a much better mold of the cast when you don't. And the child's stable. And if you're going to do it without a proper casting table, then you need to make sure that somehow you've got that whole torso free. So which way? Pull it up like that.
Jim, do you ever put differential traction onto either side of those pelvic bands?
Yeah,
or is it just equal? Or as equal as you can guess it?
It's as equal as I can somewhat guess.
Okay, so it's not deliberately asymmetric.
But I want to see and I was never quite sure when Min was doing it, what she was doing, because she was being very deliberate about what she was doing with the traction on one side to the other. I'm not sure I can tell that much. Okay. I like seeing the pelvis level and the body narrow. Right. That's really kind of where I go there. So this would be the rough position of the patient here on the bed. And just because I am right-handed, I always stand over on that side when I am doing this. It doesn't matter whether it's right side or left-sided curve. We've got some great help, and I'm going to have you come on over here. What you can see is you look through the mirror. If I look through here, I can see exactly where that prominence is. So can you guys see the prominence over here? That is what you're going to be trying to correct. So when Cottrell described his elongation, derotation, flexion, casting, what they meant was elongation is the traction that you're applying. Derotation is where you're trying to rotate the spine back. And the flexion, which is kind of a funny term, and I think it must be the French translation. Exactly, it's lateral flexion of this. But you're applying it virtually all from posteriorly. You're not applying it from the lateral aspect. So the key things then are is that someone, first of all, is going to have a good grip here on the pelvis. So when we first apply, I will apply a layer of cotton wrap, a very thin layer of cotton wrap here first, and we can do that here in just a second. But I practice the maneuvers before I ever put the cotton wrap on. That way everybody knows exactly what there's going to be. So I have our cast technician comes over, and he's been doing it with me for quite a while. Once I have molded the pelvis, he holds that mold for me. Okay. And then I instruct the residents where I want their hands to be. And my job is to correct the curve. So what I will do is I will identify pre-doing the cast exactly where my hands are going to be. And so I identify the midline, and my pressure is going to be right here on this rib prominence, just off the midline. And then the cast is, I'm going to have you hold here real stable just for a second, okay? And so as I'm doing it, I'm actually bringing this around without pressure on this lateral aspect. So I'm derotating the spine by doing this. And clearly when you do this, this shoulder starts to come up. So that's the resident's job, okay? And it's not to push hard. I want them to make a nice mold here, and usually stick a hand in here just to keep the plaster from dipping down back in the back, so I can get a nice high mold posteriorly. Get it all the way up to the upper thoracic spine, because you can get a nice mold up to T1 in the back. So nice pressure here. Use another hand to keep the plaster from dropping down. And I'm doing this, and I'm also trying to translate the midline of the spine a little bit back toward the midline. I would assume that's the same technique that virtually everyone's doing here.
Very simple. Yeah. The only thing I'd say is before you put the plaster on, just cover the mirror with something like surfing, and then whip it off when you're doing the mold so you don't get plaster covered.
And it's nice that you actually have a mirror here. I only have this one mirror up here. Yeah. And we had a bar which goes across and applies this traction for this piece, and we've had to drop off a few times and break the mirror, so I've had 7 years bad luck a number of times. We end up covering it with plexiglass, which has helped us, but then somebody has to go in and clean the mirror off pretty time. But it's an enjoyable day spending your time doing some of the casts, and it's a whole lot of fun to do. So let's go ahead and do one. Okay?
It seems to be more the ridging from casts that causes cast problems. And that's usually where the resident is holding it, gets distracted, and then goes up, and then goes back and overcorrects.
That's why I am watching this like a hawk. Okay, I am the one doing the correction on the curve. The resident's not the one doing the correction on the curve. The place where I've had the most trouble is usually right here on the anterior superior spine area, and I think what happens is that you can get some real sharp areas. So now what I've been doing is I take a piece of felt that we actually put on underneath these straps here that straddles the top of the pelvis, and I've had no issues with that. And I know Paul Sponsello has been using some foam, some soft cushioning foam, and I've really not had any issues with that. But that's the place that you're going to run into problems. So at least that's where I've had the most issues, is right down in this area. I've had a few of them. It's not very common, but I've had a couple of them that were deep enough that I had to let them in. So now what I've been doing is I take a piece of felt that we actually put on underneath these straps here that straddles the top of the pelvis. And I've had no issues with that. And I know Paul Sponsello has been using some foam, some soft cushioning foam, and I've really not had any issues with that, but that's the place that you're going to run into problems. So at least that's where I've had the most issues, is right down in this area. I've had a few of them. It's not very common, but I've had a couple of them that were deep enough that I had to let them
felt would be right underneath everything.
What is that?
A bit of compressed felt.
Yes, that's what I'm using. So I'm using a piece of compressed felt right across here and right across here. Men used to also put one here on the back of the ribs if you're pushing pretty hard, right on the rib prominence. I have not found that I need that. I've never really had a pressure sore in that area at all. So the residents usually start out up at the top. I start out down at the bottom. Apply this stuff just like you would for any other cast, very nice and snugly. I only overlap about 50% as I'm doing it, because I do not want a thick layer of cotton wrap.
Use one more.
Yeah, we'll use one more here.
Yeah.
And so, go ahead. And so this underarm things, I try to wrap up really high. And I want to feel that I'm getting the cast well molded, at least up to the maneuvering.
Okay. That enough?
Yeah, and then I try to come back even higher back in the back.
Oh, I see.
So,
Curve it.
because you really want to get back up into this
Okay,
area
so
up in
curve
here.
it round.
Exactly.
Okay.
Mhm.
Got your mold, one set of cast kind of on and off. You do the motion as you mold on the back.
I do.
Or you
I do some motion just because you don't want to hold high pressure area with anything. But so when you're molding it, I'm gonna spend, and when we first put it on, I will spend, you think, almost an inordinate amount of time down here on the pelvis, really trying to make sure that this is well molded. And then I will come back in here and I will do this, but I will keep a relatively constant pressure. And I often use my metacarpal heads. I can get a lot of push, both derotation and pushing the spine back more toward the midline as we're doing that.
No biggie.
And can I get one more volunteer who's gonna come up and be our pressure man up here? I'm a cold water man. I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I like cold water. It gives you lots of time to work. My dad used to put ice in his to give it even a longer period of time to mold. But I think it's really nice to have the water cold. It gives you a little bit longer time to work. And I think you can get a much nicer mold. The child's still, so it's not like you're in a rush to get this cast in place. If it takes one more minute to dry, it's not like you've lost out on another case during the day. Turnover's going to be terrible anyway, even if they don't have to clean the room very much. Let's do it. Yep.
Jim, do you have a preferred plaster roll width?
I usually, because of the size of the children, I like a 5-inch roll.
5-inch.
But the biggest plaster that you can reasonably get on the child and make a nice mold is good. And so I spend quite a bit of time. This is beautiful plaster. The Gypsona plaster is really, really nice. All of our residents come to the operating room with these and go, "Where did you get this plaster?" Because they get the cheapest stuff down in our emergency rooms to use. So again, I try to make sure I get the maneuver in, and I use the mirror as I'm applying this plaster to make sure I'm getting it really high back in the back. I want to try to get up to that T1 area back up here. We'll do one more layer just to kind of make it semi-realistic. And it sure is fun to play with plaster again, you know?
Don't pull too hard. Just jog it the other end.
So at this point, the child's doing pretty well, and if you have an anesthetist or anesthesiologist or whatever you choose to call them who's not too interested in the case, right now they think, oh, this is a piece of cake, everything's going to be good, no worries. And so then they go back to checking the stock market, and I'm checking up with them, how's the patient doing? Are they doing okay with it? So then I will spend the next bit of time while the plaster's sort of getting to that setting stage, really molding the pelvis. And I use my thumbs and palms to really come up into this area. And that really gives you a nice, good grip on this. And it's only once I feel this starting to begin to set that I turn this over to somebody else to do, and I will go to correcting the curve. So as this is getting there, then I will have you come and I put the palms here and thumbs just above the crest. Not pushing too deep, but just enough to keep that mold in there. And I want your hand right up here in the front, and if you take your other hand to do that, use this hand, and your job is going to be to keep it right here, and then with your second hand, reach up underneath, and you're just going to keep that plaster from dropping up. At that point, then, I come, and I am doing the maneuver here, where I'm pushing it in toward the midline, rotating anteriorly here.
Still got a bit of softness there, haven't you? Just
Yes,
yeah.
enough so that I can still
that's
mold.
the key bit. So it's not wet, but it's just still deformed.
Exactly.
Right.
And then I hold it at this point, and I'll occasionally do a little bit of moving back and forth. You were asking about how much you move your hands. Just enough to keep it from being any one spot that's getting all the pressure there. And then I just wait at this point until it's set. And this is when the anesthesiologist is starting to get really nervous. You're hearing the pulse oximeter go beep, 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 beep. And they get very nervous about it. So that's why the kids are intubated. because then they can start doing a fair amount of positive pressure. We also have that abdominal pad, which is in there. I have not.
You put the pad
I do.
in like we did
I did.
last
Just I put that abdominal pad down there. So I very rarely had to stop doing the casting. I think one time I did it. One of the few times I ended up doing it was when we were with Mehta, actually out in Salt Lake City, and we were doing it on a child with men, and we had to actually take off the cast for it. So it can happen. You can generate pretty large pressures while you're doing this. So once you feel that the cast is fairly well set, at that point then I cover this with a layer of fiberglass and let them pick whatever color they would like for the fiberglass. It doesn't matter because you won't see it when you put all the moleskin and everything else on it anyway. So I have one mother who's very smart. She's one of the children I'm actually doing with the iPad rather than that. And I always ask her, what color cast do you want? She goes, it doesn't matter. It's always going to look flesh-colored when you're done because we put on moleskin. What do you guys use to cover your cast, the edges? Use moleskin?
Fleecy with felt.
Okay.
Snake down the bottom, yeah.
like plastic tape.
This is actually what I use on the kids where I'm doing plaster. Which is
On the prominent.
Yes, we use it on all the edges. So I will make the trims. Okay, when we do this, I'm going to show you then where I make the trims. Do you have your cast saw too?
What's this round?
Muscle, in the box.
So I try to leave just enough room underneath the arms so that the child can bring their arms back over to midline. I try to bring this up right, and I feel where the manubrium is. And I just make a little indentation right there. If you're coming up over the shoulders, this is still where I go on those. This side usually needs to come down just a hair further from to get to the midline, but you want to make sure that you save all of that mold that they did on the other side.
Sorry, just to clarify, you don't go over the shoulders.
I don't usually go over the shoulders. Only if the kid's with a high apex curve, or if for some reason we're not succeeding, then I'll say, hey, do you want to try over the shoulders? And let's see if we get any more.
So primarily, even with high apex curves, you try.
Now, high apex curves, I'm gonna go over the shoulders.
So what's your high apex? T7.
Over T7 or above, I'm gonna start going over the shoulders. But most of these kids, most of their infantile curves, their apex is T9, T11, somewhere in those regions. They are not high apex curves. I don't see any reason that you need to go over the shoulders for those kids. So then I make a cut, and it's just this is men's cut here, and I remove this section. And then I will make a straight cut down on either side in here. Before I make these final cuts though, I always trim the hips. And what I end up doing is I keep flexing the hips up to make sure that they're not going to impinge on those areas. And I will trim this up above that area here. And then once I take down just a rectangular piece down here, and then I will feel the ribs, where the ribs come on either side, and I will just follow that line of the ribs out and make a fairly wide hole down here. You don't need to leave a lot of room, you just want to leave enough room down here that it's not going to break. And then I come out on the rib line on either side, and then I just trim these to match those little flares that men put in the cast on that. So that's the basic thing. So I do want you guys to see this cast saw.
So Jim, do you do that on the table, or you?
I do it. I transfer the child back to the bed before I do this. So, but here, and I've learned some of these things the stupid way. Okay, I used to do the posterior trims while the child was on this. And finally, I'm looking at having plaster drop in my eyes. And finally, it took me a while. You know, light dawns on Rocky Top. You know, and I'm going, why do I need to do this? I can put the child on the bed. I can roll them on their side. It makes it a whole lot easier. I've learned some things by being stupid. So this cast, this saw trims on its edge, and it won't cut you like this. So you're not using it like a standard cast saw up and down. And the nice thing then is you can just zip right along and take this thing off without much sweat. You're not going up and down the whole way. So I recommend if you can get a cast saw like this. It's really good.
Who's it by?
Deceiver.
Thank you.
And I've had a hard time getting them in the U.S.
Is that right?
I keep going online trying to find new ones, and we keep replacing our batteries.
This is about 8, 9 years old.
Yeah.
I don't know if they do them.
I would love to talk to a group of engineering students into taking this one on, you know, and become a minor entrepreneurs for doing it. Okay, and the posterior aspect then, where did I put that marker here? So this was our mold, was all across here. So I, in the back, will initially make a cut here. So I come up so that this is up above the buttocks, and then I will make a little notch in here. This was developed by one of our cast techs named Jeff, who's outstanding, and I call it the butt crack of Jeff. And Jeff was a former professional boxer, so I have to be careful how I actually say that. And then over here, what I end up doing is I come to the midline, because I feel like I've really pushed on this pretty well, and I will make a midline cut just to where the spinous processes are. And then I try to follow along the line of the ribs, since I want those ribs to really be free out in those areas. And I will make something that's almost a sail shape down in here to allow those whole areas to come. And again, the only thickness that I feel like I need to leave is enough for the integrity of the cast, so that the child's not going to break between this anterior opening that you have over here and what you have for this posterior thing. And then back up here, I try to, again, leave it pretty high, trying to get up to about T1 back in the back.
What do you do for the edges inside the window?
So,
cut?
yeah, so then we will cut the web-row, we will cut the garment underneath it,
and overlap that.
put a little bit of some of the cotton wrap, and then use those different things to make it softer on those edges. And so I usually finish up, and then I turn it over to our cast tech and the resident to finish doing all of the pedaling and stuff over on the bed. I began spreading out my x-rays and telling the families that I was going to be going for at least a year. And then if you guys know, do you guys know Larry Carlin in Boston? Yeah. So Larry started doing a lot of casting also. And he said, he took my philosophy and said he went to much more extremes and said, look, I'll get an x-ray at the beginning and I'll get one at a year afterwards. So I'm somewhere in the middle now. So what I end up doing is I get the x-rays before I cast the child. We're taking part in a protocol with the Growing Spine Study Group, where the protocol is to be able to compare the kids. So we get one film in the traction on the bed before we put the cast on, for the first cast only. And then I get an x-ray in the first cast, laying on the bed with all the traction removed, just to make sure that I've gotten some decent correction at that point. And then if my cast is good, if I have molded it well, I'm happy with where the kid is, even though it's a laying down x-ray. I don't get x-rays for about 6 months. And I will usually get an x-ray out of the cast the day that they come in, just to see where things are. So I try to really spread them out, because again, these kids just get x-rays again and again and again. We have an EOS, so I should probably be a little bit more liberal with it, but I haven't found real problems with it. Sometimes the families really want to see where the child is with it, and we have some negotiation about that. I feel like I have to educate them a little bit on radiation hazard too.
Now, are there any children where you have contemplated putting a cast on but have felt that they've been better managed in a molded brace?
In general, the answer is no. But the children who I think are truly better with that are children who have any type of pulmonary problem. Because you can imagine if a child has terrible asthma or some form of intrinsic lung disease, and you get in the middle of this, how are you going to get this cast off and get their lung to expand? Exactly. There have been a few kids who I have casted despite that, but I've also molded them for a brace so that they could come in, get the cast taken off, and go into a brace right away, so that there's always a brace ready for that. So to me, that's the big issue that you could run into. It's not really cast source. It's really, is this a child who has intrinsic pulmonary disease that's going to be a problem?
So Jim, just remind me, when do you move from casting to bracing?
So this again is part of the negotiation, okay? So if I am continuing to get correction on the curve, I encourage continuation with the casting after a year. So I first of all, again, I want the family to have committed that they're going to give me a year.
So it's a minimum 12 months program.
Minimum 12 months, okay? And if at that point we are continuing to get good correction of the curve, but it's not gone,
Keep going.
I encourage them to continue with
Yeah.
doing it. I've had one child that I casted for 6 years,
Yeah.
and the family was they just loved it. She's old enough now, and the curve is small enough that I've got her in a brace.
So what and what age range will you be using plaster cast? Is there an upper size or age limit where you think I can't do this anymore? I've got to go to a brace.
You know, by the time you're starting to get around age 7 or 8, it's getting really tough to do the casting. And, you know, casting I would consider doing as a temporary measure if I'm trying just to get them so that they could actually fit a brace. It's in the younger kids that I'm really doing this casting.
Right, sorry.
What's the youngest child you casted?
A little younger than 12 months.
How often do you change the cast?
So I do it based on the kid's age.
Yes.
2 and under, every 2 months. 3 months. 4 and up, 4 months.
But you said you take X-ray in 6 months, so if you change it during this, you are not doing X-ray again?
I'm not doing X-rays again.
Just initial.
Correct.
So that means you might change 3 times before you
No,
get that other one.
That's correct.
Yes,
That's exactly correct.
That sounds
Yeah.
great. That sounds really good.
Most of these children I'm starting at age, you know, most of the kids are coming to me between 1 and 2.
Yeah.
That's when they're noticing the curve, and that's usually when we're getting started.
That's great.
With your brace, do you aim to replicate the cast in terms of the cutouts and that sort of
Actually, I do exactly the same thing. So I actually take the child to the OR, and I will put on the fiberglass mold, and I will do the same molds that I did here.
So the front opening
It's
brace.
front opening brace,
With
because
a-
you want
with a-
that
with a-
posterior pressure. I think a back opening brace can be
Yeah.
troubles trying to get the pressure on it. So I am actually the one who is making the mold myself.
Yeah.
I have the orthopedist come to the operating room, he takes it and goes and makes the brace from.
And you have the same sort of cutout at the front and the
I
back?
do,
Yeah.
I do, yes.
How many times you have to split the cast for something?
Almost never.